Unintended consequences of even the most well-intentioned public policy initiatives are common and hard to predict or evaluate, and can arise through all parts of the policy process. They may come about through ineffective, counterproductive, or other policy mechanisms. What have been the unintended consequences of Jamaica's policy of attracting investment in low-wage, labor-intensive jobs? This evening's report has some answers. Good evening, and welcome to the launch of our report, Growthless Jobs, the Paradox of Rising Employment and a Stagnant Output. I am Renique Thomas, Research Officer at the Caribbean Policy Research Institute, CAPRI. CAPRI is an independent think tank devoted to evidence-based research towards improved public policy making in Jamaica and across the wider Caribbean. Through our research and its dissemination, CAPRI also seeks to foster a constructive debate around critical social, economic, and developmental issues. This evening, we are delighted to bring you our findings from our latest report, which assesses and provides key answers to the question of why, in a period of record low unemployment, Jamaica has not experienced commensurate economic growth. This report brings pertinent to the ongoing discourse on Jamaica's tight labor market, which is unprecedented, the relationship between productivity and employment, the shortage of skilled labor, as well as the methods used to estimate the country's gross domestic product, or GDP. The report analyzes some of the policy options available to Jamaica to move past the stagnation we are experiencing in order to fulfill our developmental goals and potential. In just a moment, we will hear from Ronaldo Blake, Research Assistant at CAPRI and the lead researcher on this report, who will present the main findings and recommendations. I share office space with Ronaldo and so witnessed firsthand his tireless research and the extensive preparation that he has put into the presentation, and assure you that both the presentation and findings will be thoroughly stimulating. The presentation of the report will be followed by a panel discussion with Ms. Diane Edwards, former head of JAMPRO and current director of Mona Consulting, along with Ronaldo and Dr. Damien King, CAPRI's executive director, who will moderate the panel. We encourage the members of our virtual audience to participate in the discussion by submitting your questions online using Slido. To do so, visit slido.com and enter the event code CAPRI, after which you'll be able to post and upvote questions that you deem critical for our panel to respond to. I now welcome Dr. David McBean, Executive Director of the Mona School of Business and Management and member of CAPRI's Board of Directors, to bring us some remarks.
Ladies and gentlemen, good night. As a director of CAPRI, as well as the head of the Mona School of Business and Management, it is my pleasure to give some remarks at the launch of this CAPRI report on growthless jobs. Jamaica has joined a small band of countries that have experienced growthless jobs, as despite our rapidly falling unemployment rate and vastly improved macroeconomic indicators, our economic growth rate lacks at the anemic and statistically insignificant level of 1% plus. This flies in the face of orthodox economic thinking, where you would expect a strong positive correlation between jobs and economic growth. There have been some extensive debates about the underlying factors accounting for this phenomenon. And among the obvious candidates for investigation are the following: the quality of jobs being created in terms of remuneration and whether full or part-time, and the low bar for which those in part-time jobs are counted as being employed, currently 1 hour per week minimum. Whether the key sectors where we have seen strong job growth can and will provide the necessary economic growth. Underreporting of economic activity in areas such as the informal sectors, the digital economy, and the creative industries. The net effect of high rates of entrepreneurship, given the high failure rates, over 90% of new entrepreneurial ventures, with the ensuing cycles of employment and unemployment and relatively low remuneration. The collapse in manufacturing and mining and the rise of the service sector. The continuing high levels of migration of our most skilled citizens. Studies suggest that over 80% of UWI graduates end up migrating. And finally, the state of our education sector and how are we matching the needs of the society to our educational outputs. High levels of illiteracy and semi-literacy among high school graduates are not the ideal preparation for the fourth industrial revolution in a world of machine learning and artificial intelligence. This CAPRI report has therefore come at a timely juncture, as we urgently need to have high-quality research into why we're experiencing growthless jobs. My hope is that this will catalyze sustained and detailed research into the underlying factors contributing to this, and more importantly, further form the basis for solutions that will see strong economic growth alongside strong jobs growth. I look forward eagerly to the findings and conclusions. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and good evening, everybody. We're really excited about this. I'm personally excited about this research that started at CAPRI as a curiosity. What explains this paradox of record low unemployment rates and anemic at best economic growth? And the more we scratch at the surface of that curiosity, is the deeper and more fascinating the answers got. We're going to present that report to you now, summarizing the about to be published report on growthless jobs. We welcome Ronaldo Blake, our lead researcher on the project, to take you through the highlights.
Given the fall in unemployment since 2015, the apparent shortfall in the growth of Jamaica's national output is nearly 9% of GDP. Between 2015 and 2022, the number of people employed grew by 11%, but the economy grew by only 2%. Before we go any further, let us be clear. The fact that more people are employed and the economy is expanding is a good thing. That represents 2% more goods and services than the economy otherwise would have had. However, the usual relationship is that as the economy expands, more people become employed in order to produce the additional goods and services being demanded. That is not happening in Jamaica, where we're instead witnessing growthless jobs, or the phenomenon in which unemployment falls, but there is little or no accompanying growth. We explored 4 possible explanations of growthless jobs in Jamaica. The first is Stagnant's national accounting methodology, followed by access to credit to the private sector, and then job characteristics, and finally, labor productivity. The first potential source of growthless jobs, the national accounting methodology, refers to how the Statistical Institute of Jamaica, Statin, measures national output. The primary concerns relate to how well Statin measures small business activities, informal activities, and digital transactions. To measure GDP and employment, Statin is guided by the System of National Accounts, which is an international system used by nearly every country to measure their economic activities. The data Statin uses to estimate GDP come from their own surveys, such as the Labor Force Survey and the Household Expenditure Survey. Statin also relies on secondary data from organizations such as Tax Administration Jamaica, the Bank of Jamaica, and various commodity boards. Finally, where data is incomplete or missing, they make estimates using the data they do have from the first 2 sources. This is a standard and robust approach to estimate national employment and output. Therefore, incomplete data collection is not a likely explanation of why Jamaica is experiencing growthless jobs. There is also an explanation that growthless jobs may arise from credit constraints. If businesses lack access to sufficient credit, then they are less able to invest in capital that is necessary for their growth and expansion. This is particularly true for new businesses, which are important drivers of innovation and competition. This explanation appears promising since evidence shows that restricting credit can affect productivity. A study in the United Kingdom found that a 10% fall in the credit supply was associated with a 5 to 6% fall in capital per worker and a 5 to 8% fall in labor productivity. In Jamaica, credit going to the private sector averaged 27% of national GDP over the last 30 years. By comparison, this figure was 39% for the Caribbean, 84% for other upper middle income countries, and 142% for high-income countries. This decades-long disinvestment may be manifesting today as declining productivity, but the fact that private sector credit has actually been increasing since 2017 indicates that this is not a likely cause of today's growthless jobs. Growthless jobs may also emerge if the new jobs are of a low quality. For example, if they are in the informal economy or are mainly part-time. For the sake of this analysis, we refer to decent jobs as good quality jobs. The International Labour Organization describes decent jobs as jobs that, among other things, pay a fair income, guarantee a secure form of employment and safe working conditions, and ensure equal opportunities and treatment for all. The data clearly indicates a rise in decent jobs. Locally, there was a 3% shift towards full-time work between 2015 and 2022. This was reflected in a 14% increase in the number of people working full-time, alongside an 18% decline in those working part-time. Additionally, there was a significant rise in formal employment. The share of agricultural employment declined from 18 to 16%. The share of informal employment declined from 42 to 40%. And the formal share of employment grew from 40 to 44% over just 7 years. In fact, 7 in 10 new jobs created were formal jobs. There was also a marked decline in the share of own account work from 36 to 33% of all employed workers. This data indicates that the new jobs are mostly full-time, formal sector, wage-paying, decent jobs. Therefore, poor job quality is not the likely source of growthless jobs. The final hypothesis is that growthless jobs arises from declining labor productivity as a result of employers having to call upon less skilled workers. Before we explore this further, keep in mind that labor productivity is simply the ratio of output to the number of workers. That's the definition of our own Jamaica Productivity Center. There has been a 7.8% decline in national productivity between 2015 and 2022. In fact, productivity declined in 7 of 12 industries we analyzed. In general, there was an inverse relationship between employment and productivity, such that as employment rose, productivity fell. For example, in real estate and business activities, which includes BPOs, there was an 80% increase in employment and a 43%. Meanwhile, in construction, there was a 50% increase in employment and a 27% decline in productivity. On the other side of the coin, employment in utilities declined by 45% and productivity climbed by 87% as a result. The general decline in productivity makes the source of Jamaica's growthless jobs phenomenon obvious, but understanding why productivity has fallen so significantly lies in an understanding of what skills Jamaican workers are bringing to the workforce. In 2015, the most skilled and productive workers in the economy, those with post-secondary qualifications, were nearly fully employed. The unemployment rate in that group was 6%, and fell to just 4% in 2021. As a result, the job growth could only absorb less skilled workers who generally experience higher unemployment. This is why the unemployment rate for semi-skilled workers, or those with secondary qualifications, plummeted from 21% in 2015 to 12% 6 years later. This goes to the core of growthless jobs. As the declines, so does their productivity. As Jamaica's labor force approached full employment, workers who were less skilled and therefore less productive were employed more often. But naturally, the additional output from hiring those workers gradually fell. This perfectly explains the large fall-off in productivity in the industries that had particularly strong job growth. Since in Jamaica, 3 in 5 people in the labor force are untrained, the hiring spree of the last few years exceeded the economy's capacity to supply sufficient, highly skilled and productive labor. Globally, skilled workers earn between 77 and 240% more than less skilled workers. This premium is a direct result of the higher productivity of skilled workers and is consistent with the fact that there is a strong demand for these workers. Therefore, the weak education level of the most recently employed members of the labor force is the explanation for there being so little value added to GDP. But this raises another issue. Employers nationwide are finding it harder to source workers, but many of the people currently employed work in a few labor-intensive sectors that receive numerous tax benefits. These include the business process outsourcing sector and the tourism sector. Giving special treatment to these sectors is appropriate when there is high unemployment and the government desperately needs to facilitate job creation. But in the context of a labor shortage, there's less justification for giving up tax revenue from sectors that add less to national output. This implies that the current policy framework of attracting jobs at all costs requires review. Jamaica's economy is growing and experiencing record low unemployment, but there is a growth gap of 9%. Our analysis reveals that growthless jobs is not a result of Statin's national accounting methodology, nor is it likely due to lack of access to credit. Additionally, growth in poor quality jobs was ruled out as a potential cause. What we did identify is that labor productivity fell in response to expanding employment in labor-intensive industries as increasingly lower-skilled workers were employed. Before we go into the recommendations, it goes without saying that upskilling the current labor force is an important part of the solution. But doing so successfully could take decades, in which time urgent solutions are needed. Let's now focus on the recommendations we believe will help to improve the status quo. We recommend that the government of Jamaica relax requirements for all workers by reducing financial and bureaucratic barriers. Additionally, it should reduce tax benefits which are available exclusively to labor-intensive industries, as policies aimed solely at creating jobs are no longer appropriate for Jamaica's current labor market situation. These steps will help to provide a sufficient supply of labor and will ensure employers compete fairly for the labor they need. We also recommend the elimination of mandatory statutory deductions, except for NIS, for incomes ranging from the minimum wage to 2 times the minimum wage. This will help to reduce the disincentive for employers to hire workers formally. A wise man once said, "We often meet our destiny on the path we take to avoid it." Jamaica set out to solve a low-growth, low-employment problem. Prudent policy has largely delivered high and stable employment, but the skill levels of Jamaican workers are not keeping apace. To close the growth gap, we need a more skilled crew.
Thank you, Ronaldo. And Ronaldo Blake, the lead researcher on this research, on this report, joins us on our panel. Thank you for joining us. And we're also joined by Diane Edwards, who is the director of Mona Consulting. That's the consulting arm of the Mona School of Business and Management. And we're going to be discussing and interrogating really a lot of insights and a lot of difficult decisions that are an implication of this report. I'm really excited to have this discussion. I would like you to participate in the discussion. So please remember to go to slido.com. And when you log into slido.com, just put in the event code CAPRI, and you'll be able to participate in our polls, and you'll be able to ask questions that I will direct to the panel. And you will also see other questions that other participants have put in, and you can upvote those questions, and those are the ones most likely to be asked. Okay, let's get into this really at the beginning and talk about the scale of the employment growth that we have had. If you can just put some actual numbers to that for me, Ronaldo, and where it has taken place.
So between 2015 and 2022, we've had a growth of about 120,000 new jobs. This is net growth. So in some industries, like mining and quarrying, jobs were lost, and in other industries, there was significant growth. This was concentrated in two particular industries, what they call real estate and business activities, which lumps really real estate activities, but also BPOs, business process outsourcing. And the second sector was construction. And together, both of these accounted for about 67% of the total new jobs that were created.
So 120,000 new jobs, just to put that in perspective, that's about 10% of the labor force. So this is really significant growth. Jamaica has not had an unemployment rate as low as 6% in its entire independent history. So this is a record low. Before I come to you, Diane, 6%, a 6% unemployment rate may lead you to believe that there are still lots of labor to be hired. Why is 6% unemployment basically full employment? Like, who are those 6% that remain to be employed?
So that's what economists call the natural unemployment rate. So there are some people who are changing from one job to another job who fall unemployed for some period. Some people who are leaving school or some other types of institutions that just are unemployed. And you have some people who are in some industries that are losing business, and they essentially fall out of a job for some time, and they need to be retrained and re-enter the workforce as an employed person. So that's what you usually see. In countries like Germany or the US, it can fall as low as 4%. But for Jamaica, a developing country, 5-6% is the usual level for.
So zero is impossible, is the point. A lot of this growth, Diane, has come in the BPO sector, call centers and so on. How did we accomplish this? I mean, this is something that the country, to some extent, can be quite proud of.
I think we should be proud of it, definitely. We have natural advantages to attract the BPO industry. It's an industry that is people-centric, that relies on English-speaking people primarily because the target market is North America. We have people who are young, trainable, high levels of productivity. And let me stress that because in the beginning of this industry, there were high levels of productivity, and the Jamaican workers can deliver higher productivity even than American workers. So those were the reasons why I think we attracted so much employment. Also, the location of Jamaica, the fact that we're on a similar time zone to most of the eastern seaboard of the US, we're very accessible, we're very connected, we have flights in and out. At one point before COVID, we had 400 flights a week. So it was a very attractive value proposition and remains so. We still have new companies coming into the market, even from the UK. Last year, Jampro had a company coming out of Morocco. You know, this is the first time we've had a company coming from that far. So it's still an attractive value proposition.
Ronaldo made a point in his presentation that these are decent jobs. But on Slido, one of our audience members, Mark, says that he has worked in the BPO industry and he doesn't think it's that decent a job. Would you sort of want to defend the jobs in BPO?
I would say decent job is relative. It's relative to your expectations. So on the one hand, you have employers who originally planned no car parking facilities for their places of employment, and who suddenly realized that a lot of people were actually buying cars, and so they needed to increase the car parking spaces. So that to me is an indicator of a decent job. There are other people who hate the regimentation of the industry. It's a metrics-driven industry. Metrics-driven means that everything is quantified, everything has a time, everything has metrics attached to it. How many calls do you answer in an hour? How much break time do you take? How many problems do you resolve? Some people don't like to work like that. And so I fully accept that it's not for everyone, but a lot of people who are in it, and especially young people who are bright and ambitious, one of the interesting things about this industry is the ratio of team leads and managers to employees, to base level or entry level people, because actually you have 10 people to one team lead. Then you have about 5 team leads to 1 manager. So your actual rate of progression in the industry can be very rapid. I know people who have gone to manager in a year, in 18 months. So it can be very rapid if you are ambitious and if you really stick to the plan.
Well, that raises another element of the BPO phenomenon. You know, one of the reasons why we had low productivity in the economy when you get to the part of the labor force where people are not trained is that many persons in Jamaica, you know, when you have, as we had, 10% to 12% unemployment rates going on for a long time, then you get a consistent cadre of a part of the labor force that is just not accustomed to the discipline of getting up 5 days a week and showing up at 8 o'clock every single day and being productive in that space of time. What you seem to be suggesting is that since this is a metrics-driven industry, could we see the entire BPO sector as part of the training of the labor force?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things I tell people in the BPO industry, the agents, is you are learning a lot of transferable skills. People think of BPO as person with phone. Most of the time, it's person with computer. And it's not gender specific, although there are many more females employed in the industry than males. It's really a lot about the multi-channel interface with the consumer. So you are learning customer service, you're learning timekeeping, you're learning sales, you're learning, because some of it is outbound, some of it is inbound. So sometimes it's calling people to see, do you want an additional credit card or an additional service from a bank? Sometimes it's inbound. I have a problem with my Apple iPad and I don't know how to fix it. So, you know, it's a two-way street. But a lot of what people are doing now is actually climbing that value chain and doing more or less repetitive and more interesting work. And that we have people in Jamaica who are in shared services, and they are doing work that is like report writing, data analytics, legal HR applications, healthcare applications. So the range of the industry is really quite vast.
There are a whole lot of people still outside of the labor force. And if we're in a tight labor market, then that's a potential pool of persons, one would think, that can come and be part of the productive economy. How many people are outside the labor force, and why is it so many?
So there are just over 700,000 people outside of the labor force. But before I get into why...
So that's like half of the number that's in the labor force.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Before we get into why, it's important to understand that the skills that exist outside of the labor force are roughly similar to the skills that are currently in the labor force. So even if everyone that is outside was to migrate into the labor force, we still would potentially have this problem, right? But in terms of why, you have many people who are in schools, some who are in institutions, some who are unable to work because they're caring for dependents, some who are unwell, and some who are deciding that they just don't want to work for some reason or the other. And of course, this requires investigation. But when we discuss people who are outside of the labor force, we have to consider these people as a pool of people who are exhaustible. There's only so many of them that could potentially enter the labor force. And at some point, you still run into this problem. But at 6% unemployment, you are really starting to get to the point where you're running out of the pool of labor that you could potentially draw on, because the rate of people migrating from outside to inside the labor force is limited.
So this research has thrown up two headline-grabbing recommendations. I don't think there's any way to minimize the breadth and the impact of the recommendations. And one of those recommendations, the first one, is that it's time for Jamaica to start importing labor. The recommendation is to make it easier and cheaper to get a work permit. On Slido, Paul is reminding us that the Prime Minister has said that importing labor is one of the last things that he wants to do. Do you think that that is the appropriate perspective on the issue?
So certainly not. The issue really needs to be reframed. For many, many years, at 17% unemployment, Jamaica was a country that everyone wanted to leave because they couldn't find jobs. Now we're at the point where we actually need labor. We need people to go into industries to work, to produce more. So this shouldn't necessarily be viewed as a negative thing. It's a positive thing, something we should be proud of, and something that we should be looking at exploiting and setting up in such a way that it is most beneficial to the country. We're a country of immigrants, you know? We have been immigrating to other countries, and we've complained about that. And now we're asking people to come here to work and build our country. We can't also complain about that.
Yeah.
Can I add a nuance
please.
to that, though? I think it's not about, I think one of the big points that came out of the research is that we need to really look at changing the types of industries that we attract. So no more labor-intensive industry focus, but focus on innovation, entrepreneurship. And those are the kinds of people that I think we should be trying to import. So look at digital nomads. Look at people who are creating new businesses. How can we incentivize them to do more patents, do more trademarks, do more innovative production? And we have many areas of the economy. Agriculture, I won't beat that horse, although that's a horse that I love to beat. But I'm saying that we can look at more value-added industries that we can attract, because BPO and tourism have very thin margins. And even though BPO has high retention, tourism has low retention. So you're not adding a lot of value to the economy. What you really need to look at is value added, and how do we attract the value added, the people who will deliver value added.
Well, you see, I mentioned that there are two recommendations that are profound and far-reaching, and that is the other one.
Yeah.
So we have had an approach to macroeconomic policy in Jamaica since whenever, that we need to attract jobs at all costs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And as you mentioned, that is towards labor-intensive industries. It is actually of some note that in the last general election campaign, if you look at the numbers of jobs that the two-party leaders promised to create, both of them promised to create at that time a number of jobs that was 3 times greater than the number unemployed. So, but my question to you, you say now we need to change our approach away from labor-intensive jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Given that we have had, literally since independence, this job desperation approach, to economic policy, how realistic do you think it is for us to take that policy-making mindset and turn it around?
I think it requires leadership. It requires leadership and vision. So if you look at logistics, how long have we talked about logistics and the opportunity in logistics? This week we saw an announcement in the Dominican Republic where DP World, who actually wanted to come here first, are creating a logistics aircraft operation in the Dominican Republic. I've visited El Salvador. They have a whole aircraft maintenance, a massive operation in El Salvador. It's the biggest employer, employs around 3,000 people. So that's employment side, but the other side is the technology. So this is where I think we need to shift our incentive focus and focus on technology and making technology work for us, because that's what will change the productivity picture as well.
Now, what I think is apropos about that example is that when you look at the skill set of the labor force in El Salvador, the skill profile, it very much is similar to Jamaica's, and not too much of a different size economy and population either. So it certainly could be an example. Why do you think the idea of, and I mean, going back to the sort of, the Prime Minister's sort of initial framing of it, why do you think the idea of importing labor is so taboo?
Well, because I think Jamaica, like almost any country in the world, has a threshold after which they start to feel they're losing their country. Where I think we have a real opportunity is that we have a huge diaspora. So we can import people from the diaspora without really changing the makeup. Then let's say, we're not importing Croatians, although we could. But I'm saying we could import people who are like us, who have an affinity to Jamaica, emotional connection, etc. So I don't think it's that difficult. I think it's how you frame it. There's people, knee-jerk reaction. But
okay, that wasn't my question, by the way. That was Slido's question. Okay, go to slido.com, put in the event code CAPRI, and you can ask us your questions, and I will put it to the panelists.
Just like to touch on the diaspora point before we move on. I think the challenge with that is it's still limited, and there are many people from many other countries who could potentially like to come here. And the people who live in the diaspora largely live in wealthy countries. So they would potentially be giving up high-paying jobs and very comfortable lifestyles to move here. So it's, a challenge attracting them.
That's case in point. There's an operation on UWI campus which has brought in people from Eastern Europe to do software development, because obviously Eastern Europe is not such a salubrious place to be right now. So that's another type of software development, is much less labor intensive, but it's also very high paying jobs. So it comes back to the question of how do we upskill our people? Because you can actually take people who are not degreed or not graduates and teach them software development skills, app development skills. There are a lot of ways you can leapfrog some of these academic qualifications. And I'm not telling people not to go to university. I work for a university. It's great. University is important and graduate degrees are important, but I'm saying we need to create other channels that are more accelerated to get people into work.
One of our audience members, Myrtle, is curious as to why we sound like we're defending the BPO sector when the research has shown that it is the BPO sector that represents, certainly not about BPOs alone, because the same thing applies as well to other industries. You mentioned tourism. Yeah. But the question is, since the BPO sector seems to have not created a lot of value added, and again, linking it back to your point about shifting the focus of what are the kind of industries we seek to attract. Most of the BPO sector, most of the BPO activity is taking place inside special economic zones. Mm-hmm. And special economic zones are designed precisely to create jobs without all of the broader benefits to the economy. So if we are arguing for a shift of focus away from labor-intensive industries, does that mean that we have undermined the very foundation of having special economic zones in the first place?
No, I don't agree with that perspective, because special economic zones were designed to actually reintegrate more the industries that locate in SEZs with the rest of the economy. The original free zones were enclaves, and they were cut off from the rest of the economy. The special economic zone legislation was designed to integrate the production that's taking place in the zone with the rest of the economy. So it was to break down the wall. And so what you want are more productive enterprises. So for instance, the Port of Kingston, the Kingston Freeport Terminal, that is a special economic zone. And there's a reason why it is. The German ship repair operation out at Harbour Head, Port Royal there, that is also a special economic zone. What you want is more productive enterprise in there, not just BPO.
So J.C. Strawn on Slido has identified what he or she is suggesting is the lowest productivity part of the economy, which is government. So to what extent could we solve this problem by the public sector shedding labor and making that labor potentially available to higher productivity industries? This is a perfect time for the finance minister to slim down and, make the public sector more efficient.
I think this question is bigger than me. I think there are many reasons why we have challenges in government in terms of productivity. It's not an enterprise that's out there to make profits in large part. I think the skill levels that are in government are also very similar to the skill levels that are in private sector. Also, you have challenges in terms of the structure. I think we have gone through a process of reforming the public sector and trying to make it more efficient. There's definitely a lot of work that still needs to be done in terms of just accelerating digitization, connectivity between people and government. And of course, CAPRI has done work on NIDS before that could potentially be a major step forward in kind of accelerating that process. But I'm not sure how I would come down on shedding even more government labor now to increase productivity there.
I would make 2 points about that. One is the question of industrial planning and workforce planning. I don't think we're doing any of that. So in other words, if you take a country like Costa Rica, CINDE, which is our counterpart there, what do? They go to industry and they go to government, and they look 5 years out, what is the demand for what type of labor? How many engineers will you need? How many teachers will you need? How many doctors? Whatever. And then they go and produce that. They work with the educational institutions to produce that. So I think that's one direction we definitely have to go, because we don't know what we will need in the future. The second thing is, I slightly disagree with Ronaldo in terms of the level and skill sets in the government. There are actually some very, very skilled and very high-powered people in government. But a lot of them are frustrated. They're frustrated by the procedures, the processes, a lot of things, okay, the bureaucracy. So the point is, if you really do workforce planning, you can start to look at how do you develop other industries with higher paying jobs, more interesting jobs that can then ease those people out of the public sector. So you improve the productivity of the public sector and you create high paying jobs elsewhere. I'm not saying this is easy, by the way. It's not easy. Putting in place the planning and the coordination necessary. Costa Rica has done it. Look at what they've done. Software development, $3.3 billion in exports. Agriculture is the other plank up for them. Just saying. And they export a lot of fruits and vegetables.
One of the insights that has come out of this research, we have recognized for a long time the weaknesses in the educational system.
Mm-hmm.
But it has never really risen, it has never intersected very much with the broader economic discussion as long as we had what looked like surplus labor.
Mhm.
What you have described in your research is that are employed, then the constraint, the binding constraint, are the skill levels. So what is holding back the economy now, this is my interpretation of it, is actually the failure of 60 years of the educational system. 60 years of just failing to
I would agree.
educate and upskill the labor force. So the consequence of 2-3 generations of educational system failure. Then even if we improve the educational system now, that payoff is going to be, as you said in the presentation, 2 or 3 decades down the road when that cohort comes into the labor force. So all of that is to say, we need to identify shorter term ways, more quick return ways of upskilling the labor force. What are those?
So I think one of the things that is hard, doing remedial courses for people who may have 1 CSEC or 2 CSEC, they don't have math and English, they don't have the basics, so we can do remedial for them. But on a mass scale, I'm talking about, not a few hundred, a few 100,000 is what I'm talking about, which requires huge deployment of resources. So that's a short-term measure. There, again, in terms of upskilling, I'm going to do a short commercial for Mona School of Business Consulting, because we have a full executive education program for professionals. So, and there are other institutions, obviously, in the economy that do this. But so you can do executive education, which are short courses that can upskill people and certify them. You have micro credentials, which can start to upskill people. You have ways of using technology to accelerate learning and to create certified people in a short space of time. We have to start to use the technology that is available.
Okay, that's one way. I mean, can that be done on a sufficiently large scale?
I think it can. It's the deployment of resources. HEART has 28 centers across the country. They need to expand the amount of training that they give and the amount of courses that they give. The point about COVID, what it taught us is we can do a lot of learning online. It's true. A lot of people don't have access to it, but that's a broadband problem. That's a network problem. You can solve those problems, and then the best teachers in the country can be teaching everybody across the country. Why aren't we doing that?
Ronaldo Slido is asking, how does the cost of tertiary education figure into closing the skills gap? And how do we get around it?
So, of course, the cost is something that a lot of students think about. And to some of them, it might be off-putting, because if the return is viewed as being less than or equal to the investment, clearly it will not be made. So a part of it is just making sure that the return is clear to students, in which case sometimes it isn't. For many students, getting a tertiary degree is really just a way out, right? Because it becomes easier to migrate to Canada, the US. But nonetheless, there are still options that are available to students in terms of funding a tertiary education. And clearly that can allow them the ability to upskill. In terms of getting around the restraint that poses, that's a more difficult question and might require us to make some institutional changes to increase access to tertiary education. But we've, of course, seen some significantly positive developments, really, in terms of removing the need for guarantors to the SLB, and just the expansion in the number of tertiary programs that are being offered and the institutions that are competing. And very recently, of course, the announcement that HEART would sue is a step in the right direction.
Absolutely.
So all tertiary education doesn't have to look like a university degree. It could
And
look
the
like technical
apprenticeship.
skills.
And the apprenticeship. the opportunity for apprenticeship. If you look at a country like Germany, that's how they built their whole system on apprenticeship and medium-sized companies. That is a very viable option that we haven't really taken.
We know that a high percentage of those with tertiary education migrate. The figure for the University of the West Indies is something like 80%. That's a potential source of labor for Jamaica. I know the experience of Ireland in the 1990s when they went from being a slow-growing economy for decades to a rapidly growing economy in the 90s and beyond. There was huge return migration of Irish from the United States. So to some extent, Jamaica might benefit from that as well.
Yes.
The entire diaspora becomes a potential addition to the Jamaican labor force.
Well, I mean, it's something I studied at the time when they were called the Celtic Tiger, is to really ramp up the incentives for software companies, particularly technology companies that located in Ireland. They had a 10% tax rate when the rest of Europe was in 25%. And that's one reason why they got a lot of those companies to put their headquarters in Ireland. And I actually went to Ireland and tried to ask them, well, what is the secret? What is your secret sauce? And they told me 3 words: education, education, education. Because they started like we did with a rural young population, undereducated, agrarian. So they needed to convert that population, and they converted them through education. So we have to find ways to really upskill it. It all comes back to education. And so we're going to have to invest more in primary education. We're going to have to start producing people who have a basis, a basic foundation that we can build on. Because you can't build on them when they're 12 and 15. It's too late. You have to really start young. And that is what Ireland is look at, trying to get some of our teachers upskilled, reskilled, because some of the teachers can't cope with the technology. They're afraid of it. Critical thinking means that the children are going to backchat you and they're going to ask difficult questions. They're going to challenge you, but that's what you're going to have to get accustomed to and you're going to have to deal with. So it's really revolutionizing the education system. We've gone through a Patterson report. I think it has 300 plus recommendations, and there's a whole mechanism now of implementing that. We have to find the quickest way to implement that, because human capital is the most important element of competitiveness. If we don't upgrade our human capital, we're going to be left behind. And let me even tell you that BPO, much as we love it, has its shelf life as well, because robotic process automation and AI are coming for those jobs. And if we don't upskill the people in that industry, we are going to hear, we're going to see the exodus. So life is very dynamic, and I just don't think we're moving fast enough in some of the critical areas.
Yeah, well, many that economies are dynamic, and technology is changing all the time. Countries are, changing their own economic structures, and as one economy in the entire world, you have to have the flexibility to be able to respond to that. So I think we here on the panel, and I think everybody participating in the audience and listening, should take a moment to appreciate the problem we are here discussing. We are discussing the problem of too many jobs, of a country in which, and I'm sure you do this too, if you go around and you talk to businesses in every sector, they have difficulty finding people to hire.
Yeah.
And what has come out of this discussion is that it is causing us to rethink our policy framework in profound ways.
Absolutely.
The whole point of work permits was to create an advantage for Jamaicans in getting jobs. That's the whole point of, having a work permit requirement and having to go through a highly bureaucratic and expensive process. As you pointed out, the framework up until now has been attracting labor-intensive jobs. And now it calls for a rethinking of that.
Yeah.
So as it turns out, we started to ask a simple question. Why have jobs surged and the economy has not? And in going through that exercise, we have come iteratively, through many steps, to the realization that it has deep and profound implications for economic policy in Jamaica. That it requires that we rethink the labor market and the economic framework. Please go to Slido. There is a poll on slido.com we'd like you to participate in. And do we have a result to show? There you go. Do you have a better understanding of the issues of growthless jobs? Yes, so your time has been well spent. Thank you for joining us. This has been CAPRI's launch of Growthless Jobs. The report is going to be available on our website on Monday morning, first thing for you to download and keep your own copy. Good night. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for that thought-provoking panel discussion. The information in this report has provided some answers to the question of Jamaica's falling productivity and has highlighted key recommendations to address the issue. The report in its entirety is available on our website at capricaribbean.org. We encourage you to read it and share with others who are interested in the topic. Please follow us and like and share our posts across all social media platforms, including Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. All our previous reports are also available on our website. We look forward to continued engagement with you on this topic and other topics on the CAPRI agenda, including our next report on the role of the church in Jamaican governance and political decision-making, which will be launched in late April. I would like to extend our warmest thanks to our presenter, moderator, and panelists, and to the good corporate citizens who support CAPRI's work in the public interest throughout the year. We especially acknowledge you who take the time to listen and engage with us. Thank you, and see you next time.